Hi, Simon here. And before we get to this week's episode, I just wanted to tell you about our Black Friday course offer, where for 1 week only, we're offering you our comprehensive online-only SUP safety course for 50% off. And that's a huge reduction down to £18.50 for lifetime access. It's full of instructor-led videos, quizzes and downloads with the key information you need to know, and it's designed to help you weigh up and make the right decisions as you get on the water. The aim of the course is to give new or intermediate paddlers the help you need to become more self-sufficient. It's all useful stuff, and it covers tides, conditions, weather, water flow planning, cold water kit, beach safety, and a whole lot more. This is an offer we only do over Black Friday week. So don't miss out on this 50% offer, and you can claim it by going to supfmpodcast.com/course and by using the code BF50. So that's supfmpodcast.com/course using the code BF50 for 50% off, and that offer ends at midnight on Tuesday, the 30th of November, 2021. Okay, let's get on with the show.
Aloha, and welcome to SUPfm, the podcast for stand-up paddleboarders everywhere. So with no further ado, let's get out on the water and on with the show. Here are your hosts, Nick and Simon.
All right, good afternoon, Simon. This is our first ever SUPfm book club, and I'm just wondering how it's going to turn out.
Well, I don't know. There's only one way to find out, isn't there? I mean, this is certainly something different, and we're increasingly looking at different formats. So, it'd be really interesting to know what our listeners think of this. But, we have been totally inspired over the years by a bunch of authors, both directly from the stand-up paddleboard fraternity and sisterhood, but also from other people who have really inspired our love of being on the water. So we're going to deal and we're going to talk through some of our favourite books today. Yeah,
should we just sort of list them off quickly, like a kind of contents list? Because we're going to talk about 8 books in various stages of detail. And the first one is Matt Crofton, Mighty. Second one is Laird Hamilton's Force of Nature, which we're probably going to gloss over. And then the third one is Laird Hamilton's current book, Life Rider. And the fourth one is Lizzie Carr's Paddling Britain, who, if you listen to, what episode number was it? A couple of episodes back.
A few episodes back.
Anyway, but Lizzie, so she talked about that on paddling on the episode. And number 5 is Mark Rainsley's Paddle the Thames, a guide for all of those of you over in the USA who want to come and explore the UK. Or if you're living in the UK, you can also explore the Thames. And number 6, Fiona Quinn's Ignore the Fear, which I've read, and it's fantastically interesting.
Then we've got Tristan Gooley. So this is one of my contributions to the list. Absolutely fantastic guy, lives relatively close to me in a place called West Sussex, but looking forward to discussing that. And then finally, we've got Wallace J. Nichols with his book Blue Mind, which again is a very fascinating read.
Yeah, I mean, I had a look through all of these books and they're completely different. So first of all, Matt Crofton, it's a novel and it's a story, and it's a really compelling story, because I think we first came across it when we were speaking to Dave Cornthwaite back in episode 18, and this is what he had to say about Matt Crofton, because he was paddling down the Mississippi, and he just had this to say about Matt Crofton.
I mean, there were 2 other guys paddling almost at the same time as you, weren't there? And that guy Matt Crofton, he wrote a book called Mighty, which I read as well.
Oh, Matt's an awesome guy. I was paddling, maybe I was into day 10 or so, and I hear this whistle and then this man shouting, and I'm alone on the river, and up above Minneapolis, it's it's really windy and maybe only 50 meters across. And I looked behind, and there was another guy on a stand-up paddleboard. I couldn't believe it. So I slowed up, and Matt caught me up, and we high-fived mid-river, and he just told me his story. And he's an amazing guy. He'd almost died the year before. He'd been in a coma for a long time, and just miraculous that he survived. And he was still physically impaired in many ways. You know, his body was really slow, his immune system wasn't too hot, but he was just an absolute champion. And his book is brilliant. It's called Mighty. I think if anybody wants an inspiring, adventurous read, then that's definitely the book to go and buy.
Yeah, he's just about to get a publishing deal as well, because I think he self-published it. And we're looking forward to chatting to him on SUPfm as soon as we can. So that's going to be fun too, because it's interesting to hear about two different angles on that same year, on that same river, from the stand-up paddling.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was great just to see somebody else on a board. You know, it was still pretty rare to see that back in 2011, let alone on the same stretch of river on the Mississippi. And Matt was traveling super slow just because of his physical condition. He was still recovering from his illness the year before, and I think he'd started 4 years before me. But I didn't know about him. He wasn't too hot on the social media at the beginning of the trip, at least, and so it was a total surprise to see him. But really magic, and we still chat, and I love that man. He's just a super example of a human being.
Because I read it afterwards, and it was fascinating. Have you had a chance to have a look at it, Simon?
Yeah, no, I read it. I absolutely devoured it. I think in one sitting back in 2015 originally, and I've read it since, and it's just a real affecting story. A true story. He suffered some very, very serious health problems, and when he was in a coma and he was given 48 hours to live, he made an amazing recovery and made a decision that he was going to paddle the length of the Mississippi, the mighty Mississippi, and he set off on his journey, 2,552 miles. And originally his intention was to be the first paddleboarder down there. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to achieve that, but he did achieve a lot of things on the way.
Yeah, and I felt it was such an easy read as well. You're right, it was compelling, and there was a very weird experience of him on the banks of a river when he was almost delirious, I think. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah, exactly.
And he didn't. Yeah, I think he was still sick and he didn't know whether he was coming or going. But then, it was an incredible achievement. And we've been trying to get hold of him actually to get him onto the podcast, but no response yet.
No, well, if you're out there, Matt, we'd love to chat with you. And for me, this was a phenomenally inspirational journey. You know, he came. We won't go through all the various adventures that he had, but one of the consistencies throughout all of it was, first of all, the therapeutic effects of just being on the water and being able to sort of obviously process his illness, but also the kindness of strangers. And he met lots and lots of people, including Dave Cornthwaite, who he was a big fan of while he was going down. So it really is, if you're looking to set out on an adventure, you don't necessarily have to do 2,552 miles, but this is a fantastically inspirational book, so we'd highly recommend it. I got mine on Kindle. I presume there's hard copy available, but Mighty by Mike Crufton, brilliant.
Yeah, we'll drop a link in the show notes so you can get it on Kindle. It's currently like $4.23 on Kindle, and on paperback it's $20.99. So you save a lot on the Kindle. But I just wanted to say one thing about his trip down the Mississippi, because it seemed to me so bizarre that Dave Cornthwaite would be the first person to paddle down the Mississippi. Matt Crofton wanted to be the first person to paddle down the Mississippi. And apparently there was another guy as well who was paddling the Mississippi that year. So all these three random people suddenly came together and stand-up paddleboarded the Mississippi in 1 year, which I think it was 2016. I may be wrong.
And one of the things that he mentioned on the way, which is obviously familiar to those of us who have been paddleboarding for a long time, is the amount of interest he had. And I think it's a bit more regular seeing paddleboarders these days. But back when he was doing this trip back in 2012, you got a lot of crowd interest in what you were doing. The idea of standing up on a board was just quite revolutionary. Whatever way, being the first really wasn't the thing for Matt Crofton. It was the fact that after suffering from such an acute illness and still really being not quite right, he managed to be able to nail it and get all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, which was a phenomenal achievement.
Yeah, and it's amazing with adventures like this, though, because, like you say, it is an amazing feeling being on the water. But he didn't say anything that happened after the adventure, because I know a lot of adventurers get sort of post-adventure depression.
Exactly.
I remember feeling it a bit as on the expeditions as well. You've been paddling solidly for 9 days, and that becomes for me, it was only 9 days. For him, it was obviously 3 months. You feel a sense of, well, what do I do now? It's a bit of like, and it's a bit of a letdown once you've finished. So that's maybe something that we can discuss in huge and great detail with some of the adventurers coming on.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I discussed briefly with Sian Sykes, who paddled round Wales, and when she finished, she actually went out on a paddle the day after. She kind of anticipated that she might have that problem, but yeah, absolutely. It's when you're really focusing on something, it's really difficult to know how to follow it up, particularly in those immediate moments afterwards.
Kind of brings us to the larger than life Laird Hamilton, and I would hope that his first books would be about the history of stand-up paddleboarding, because he essentially invented it or brought it back to life from an ancient Polynesian art form.
Exactly.
Wouldn't you expect that to be one of his first books?
Well, we've got a couple of books that we're looking at here. We've got Force of Nature and Life Rider. I've had Force of Nature for a while now and really enjoyed that book. And he does have a section in the back of that about stand-up paddling and the history of it, and also some tips and advice and so on in there, as well as obviously his other claim to fame, which is the toe-in surfing and working as a innovator for foiling as well. But Force of Nature is a great book, and it's kind of a bit like a collection of blog posts, really. And it talks quite a lot about the mentality of a high-end athlete, which he is. He talks a lot about his training, both from a sort of kit point of view. So, if you happen to have a huge gym facility in your house, then he's got you covered on that one. But he also covers other things like body weight exercises, and he's big into yoga as well. So he covers that physical aspect. But he concentrates very much on his mental approach, and clearly, he's got a very successful mental approach, based on both his sports success, his status as an innovator, and also as a businessman, because he's got all sorts of products all over the place.
Sure. Do you think the title is referring to himself as a force of nature?
Well, I guess it must be him then, yeah, because he's the subject of the whole thing. I mean, the interesting thing about this is it's also got people who he's collaborated with, who also sort of write excerpts in there, including Gabby Reese, who's his wife and hugely successful, hugely successful athlete in her own right. So, he's not short of confidence, my guess would be, but quite rightly, and I think we can all learn something from him.
Absolutely, no, definitely learn something from him. But you're right, he's not short of confidence. And getting to his next book, Life Rider, I just would love to read the first couple of, the first page. Because it's kind of what we were talking about with the confidence. So if you bear with me, I'll just read it quickly. It says, "It would be very easy to dismiss Laird Hamilton. Many have and still do. Controversial, incorrigible, radical, visionary, revolutionary, disrespectful, disobedient, unpredictable. A dick. Laird's emphatic statement that he would take every wave and don't get in my way, big dogs eat first, set him up as a potentially extraordinary yet fairly unpleasant growing master of his art." I mean, that's quite a powerful opening, isn't it?
Did he write that?
No, because the book wasn't written by him. It's written by Julian Borah as well. That's the introduction. of the book.
No. Well, funny you should say that, actually, because I've written down the first quote from Force of Nature here, and it is something that's shared. It's exactly the same opening quote as Matt Crofton's Mighty, and it comes from Mark Twain. And Matt Crofton, very inspired by Mark Twain, the American playwright and author, who was in turn inspired by the Mississippi. But Laird Hamilton starts his book by saying, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbour, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream and discover.
Oh, it's inspiring.
I'm ready to go out and paddle now.
Yeah. There's another quote from Laird Hamilton in his book, in Life Rider. It says, "You can run, swim, dive, fly. You are amazing. You have untapped potential in you that would blow your mind." So, yeah, he's a highly inspirational guy. And he's somebody that a lot of people look up to, us included, because, thanks very much for bringing back stand-up paddle. Otherwise, if it wasn't for Laird Hamilton and Dave Kalama, I don't think we would be paddling right now.
Yeah, exactly. Dave Kalama's in this book as well, in The Force of Nature. So it's really a who's who of stand-up paddling, particularly in terms of Hawaii. So very, very good book.
And obviously it's, I emailed Laird the other day and asked him to be on the podcast, but we're still waiting for the response. So let's hope we can, if any of you out there have any way of getting in touch with him, we'd love to try and get involved.
Fabulous.
And get him on the podcast. Might be difficult, but we can try hard.
Well, we got Kai Lenny, didn't we? Maybe we can put in a word with him.
Exactly. Yeah. So number 4 in our list of 8 books, Lizzie Carr. She is billed as the most famous paddler in Britain.
Yeah, and from breaking news this week, she's 6 months pregnant, so congratulations due to her. I had a great chat with her several weeks ago on the podcast. Funnily enough, I think, as I mentioned before, we went to exactly the same university and did exactly the same course. A slight difference in age, but other than that, that was quite a coincidence. But she's written one of the most popular paddling books, certainly selling in the UK, obviously, which is Paddling Britain and Ireland. And when she was on the episode, she talked about where it all started for her, where her paddling started, which was recuperating again from illness, but on the Scilly Isles, which is just off the coast of Cornwall in the Atlantic, and the most glorious place to paddleboard. It's got its own little microclimate, and certain sides of the islands are all fairly sheltered, and it's all sort of white sand and lovely blue seas. So that's one of the key
clearly
locations.
That was one of her. Is that one of her best places to explore? Because there's 50 best places to explore in this guide, this unique guide. So it says that Lizzie Outside, Britain's best-known paddleboarder, is written by her, and it reveals the 60 best places to go paddleboarding in Britain, from Devon and Cornwall to Monmouthshire, Norfolk, Cumbria, and the Cairngorms. I think that'll only mean something to you if you live in the United Kingdom. But anyway, it's a great way to explore. So it also provides a full rundown on everything you need to know for a successful and enjoyable stand-up paddleboarding. Safety tips to kit, weather watching to paddling responsibly. So it sounds like this book's got everything in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Loch Laggan is her ideal, or her favourite Scottish paddle, alongside obviously her favourite spot on the Scilly Isles. But Lizzie's also the owner and the creator of Plastic Patrol, which is international an initiative in order to log and pick up plastic or other litter and trash. So that's really worth a mention and worth a look, and we'll include the link to Plastic Patrol in the show notes.
And that's actually included in our list of 14, or our guide of the 14 best apps that you need to stand up paddle on, which you can get for a limited time on SUPfm.show. So head over there and get that. And one of those apps is the Plastic Patrol app.
Absolutely, really and that list is that list of apps has been pulled together by ourselves our favourite apps, and includes the best tracker apps, the best weather apps. There's even an app on there for tracking ship traffic and so on, which is a real.
I got totally sucked into that one.
I know. Well, I did.
Brilliant.
I did warn you. You can spend hours on that. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like the plane tracker, but it's a ship-based one, so you can see ships and their passage and where they are anywhere in the world. So avoid that if I were you. Probably if you want to use your time effectively.
Looking for cruise liners. Couldn't find any cruise liners. I think they've all been struck off the ocean by COVID-19. But anyway, it's a whole other thing. So Lizzie Carr's Paddling Britain is a great read. It's an informative read. It's not a novel. It's a guidebook. And if you're looking to go and find the best spots in the UK to paddle, you can download that from our link in the show notes on www.supfm.show/book club.
Moving on, there was a book that was published recently, and someone who, again, we want to get on the show is Fiona Quinn with her book Ignore the Fear. And I understand she was making the trip from Land's End to John O'Groats round about the same time as Cal Major.
Well, it was interesting because she started 2 weeks before Cal Major left, and she finished 2 weeks after Cal Major finished. So it's kind of like another case of the Mississippi. It was the first time anybody had done this, paddleboarded from one end of the United Kingdom to the other. And there were two people doing it. Now, hers was a very, very different trip to what Cal Major did. And I'm not sure if you've listened to the Cal Major's podcast. I mean, I'd say you, I don't mean you, Simon. I mean all of our guys, our people listening. Because Cal Major's was almost entirely unsupported. I think she had some support from, photographic support and everything on the way, but she was essentially paddling on her own every single day. Whereas what Fiona did, she organized a boat to paddle, to troll alongside her and help her, because the whole thing about this book, and it's called Ignore the Fear, is that she was petrified the whole time. And it's quite an interesting angle on a sort of adventure expedition book, because normally they're all like gung-ho and like, I can take everything on and I could do whatever. But this is a completely different angle, and it's a very refreshing read. And she did this trip, as I said, very differently to Cal Major, and she had her boat, and then what they'd do is they'd troll out on the boat out of safe harbors, and then whenever she stopped paddling, they'd mark an X on the GPX, go back to the harbor, and then carry on the next day, or when the weather was sufficiently calm. So it took her a lot longer to do it like that way, but she did a different route completely, and she went from Cornwall, she went right across the Bristol Channel, taking in an island across the middle of the Bristol Channel. And that's quite a fascinating place as well. That it's one of the highest tidal variances in the world. I think it's about 15 meters or something. Am I right, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. There's only one place in Canada, I think it's the Bay of Fundy or something near Newfoundland, that's got a bigger tidal range. But yeah, to cross the Bristol Channel, and it's a busy waterway as well. I mean, Fiona Quinn, her achievement is absolutely enormous, because it was open water the whole way round, and that crossing to Ireland was just absolutely phenomenal. So to be honest, I'm not surprised she was fearful the whole way. I think I probably would have been as well.
Yeah, and then she paddled up the east coast of Ireland, and then she crossed back over to Scotland and went up through there. But yeah, do you mind if I read a little excerpt from her book?
No, you go.
So that she just reached Scotland, and she's coming into this really hairy spot that they'd known about. And it starts with saying, calm down. What's happened? Where are you? I went past the first little island, like you said, but then I started to be pulled towards Corryvreckan. I can't fight the tide. It's too strong. What's taking you so long? Don't worry about fighting the tide. Just beach yourself on an island and we'll come and pick you up. I can't. I've been trying that for half an hour and I can't go anywhere. The tide is too strong. That's okay. Don't worry. I'm being pulled towards Corryvreckan. I'm going to die. No, you're not. You're going to be fine. Are there any boats around you? There was one, but it couldn't see me waving. It's over by the coast and heading towards Crinan. I can't see you. Can you describe what's around you? What can you see? And this was her about to be getting caught in the whirlpools of Corryvreckan, which are a very notorious section of the coastline, where all these currents come together and quite a few boats have been lost in the whirlpools that are created by that. And so she was clearly panicking and about to get in there, but she got out okay. But it was pretty tense stuff.
Well, it sounds absolutely horrific. And a support boat wasn't nearby. I mean, that's absolutely.
They'd pulled in
terrifying.
to get some supplies at the time. So and they said, no, it's fine. You'll never get there in time by the time we get there. And she'd motored on because the current took her unexpectedly far. So it was quite an incredible situation.
Well, certainly very gung ho. That's but an incredible achievement to get all the way up there and through the Irish Sea, and particularly with all the tides and the currents that are running around that area. They're really treacherous. So, well done, Fiona.
So the next book on our list is one by Tristan Gooley, who is a fellow United Kingdom person.
Yeah,
is that correct? He's British.
Yeah,
and it's. I was just looking at it today, and it's incredible. It's How to Read Water is the title, and it's clues and patterns from puddles to the sea. And I spent a bit of time in the African bush looking at spoors. You know what a spoor is like? It's a footprint of an animal. So you can read where the animals have been just by looking at their footprints in the sand. Mm-hmm. And I kind of thought maybe this is the same thing. Obviously, it's much more complex because if you're looking at it, and I think what's interesting from what Tristan Gooley is saying is that you can actually find out so much about water from observing from the shore and looking how water flows around rocks and how it flows around stones and looking at puddles as you can, even more so from when you can in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So what did you get from this book?
Well, I've been an admirer of Tristan Gooley's his writing for a long time, and he's what's called a natural navigator, and he's an explorer in his own right. He crossed the Atlantic solo by plane and also by boat, and his thing is to use signs on the water and natural signs in order to help him navigate. So without equipment, without GPS, without maps, and he's taken it to a bit of an art form. He spent time with Polynesian and Micronesian Pacific Islanders to learn their methods of navigating, and spent time with tribes in the desert and so on. So there's a huge amount of clues that he uses, and there's a huge amount of really useful stuff that he can provide to people on the water in order to not only help you navigate, but help you manage weather and understand weather and tides and winds and currents and so on. There's some great examples he gives. He's essentially like a sort of Sherlock Holmes character. Sherlock Holmes is all about the clues that people don't necessarily notice. He understands those and interprets them and provides a bit of a fuller picture. And what I've found since I've been consuming his books, because they are absolutely fantastic and they're very, very full, is that I notice a lot of high variety of things than I would do otherwise, and it allows me to be a lot more sensitive to tides and weather, and be able to manage the safety element, but also the interest element of my paddles. And it does make you a whole lot more mindful when you're out on the water.
I think it must change your entire view on water, because he doesn't just talk about pools of water and oceans. He talks about lakes and the color of water, the sound of water, reading waves, currents and tides of water at night. And he's got a chapter on ship watching. Is that where you found out about your fascination with ship watching apps?
No, that came both before, during, and after reading the book. But he talks about sea fog and sea breezes, and I know that there are a lot of new paddlers out there at the moment, and I haven't seen a better explanation of tides and how they work than I've seen in this book. But it's not just about oceans. Obviously, oceans are very, very complex with the tides and currents and so on. But he also talks a lot about rivers and lakes and so on. And it's just fascinating beginning to end. And he talks a lot about nature and animals and observing their behaviours. So it's just got absolutely loads of information in. But it's not just a guidebook, because he's a very good writer and he tells stories in there as well and illustrates things to keep them alive. So I would highly recommend this book if you want to get to know more about water and how it works. And it works internationally, so it's not just UK based examples.
Excellent. So the last book on our list is by Wallace J. Nichols, called The Blue Mind. I had a chance to look at a couple of his videos on YouTube, and it's fascinating because I think a lot of people have done a lot of research into the green mind, and they're talking about how the calming effects of ocean and the calming effects of nature, and how they're using it for post-traumatic stress disorder and all psychotherapy. I remember a long time ago reading about psychologists just suggesting if you're feeling a bit troubled, just go sit on the water, sit on the ocean, sit on the shore. And watch the waves rolling in, and that sort of cadence of the waves and the rhythmicness, is that a word? Rhythm.
Yeah.
The rhythm of the waves will just calm your mind. And he goes into this in great detail into the calming effects and restorative effects.
Well, I mean, it's always been something that people have suspected, but these days, very clever neuroscientists can actually look at the behaviour of the brain when it's sort of in a scanner, when you sort of show it images of water and waves breaking, or even sitting by a nice peaceful lake. And water is such an important part, not just physically, because we was it 70% water we are, or something like that, but there's a massive affinity between our brains. They're designed to react positively to water, and it radiates calmness. And there's a lot of post-traumatic therapies, particularly military based, which are related to surfing or just spending time on the water. But it's got a great affinity to paddleboarding, particularly because paddleboarding creates flow, it's called, concentration. You need to basically keep your awareness at all times. And the other thing is you need to keep awareness of the conditions, because every time you go out on the water, it's going to be subtly different from any other time you go. And,
and that's practicing mindfulness right there, isn't it? I mean,
exactly.
Just focusing on something else other than your thoughts.
And I actually wrote an article a few years ago now for SUPmag UK, which talked about the benefits of stand-up paddleboarding for the mind. So we talked about the sort of meditative qualities, but also the learning aspects to it. So and the fact that you can adjust it to make it as difficult or not as you want. So it is a scalable sport in the way that surfing isn't, because that's very specific about the conditions you need to be out in. So SUP is very good, I think, and very close to this sort of blue mind situation. And nature as well. I mean, as you said, we're out there, we're doing this stuff in nature. And one of the other arguments that he talks about towards the back end, which I've found fascinating, is if you don't see the effects of trash or pollution, then generally as human beings we don't worry about it. And something that's run through all of our episodes this season has been the ecological piece. Lots of people have really discovered an absolute horror and terror of the amount of trash that's there in our waterways, by being out there and observing it. And I think that stand-up paddleboarding, you can't fail to be concerned when you're out there and you notice it. And I think there's a potential real force for good if all paddleboarders can keep sharing their Instagram images of being out there, having a lovely time, and encouraging more and more people to get out in the water, because it's only by seeing these problems that we're ever going to sort it out.
Absolutely. And Sup Garbage Man, who you just interviewed last week, was a great example of that. And I'm interviewing a chap from Plastic Tides very, very shortly. And so that'll, strengthen that whole argument as well. So it's looking forward to a lot of that, because it's a tremendous problem, and something that hopefully we're winning against, but I don't think so.
But it did, reading this book did solve a couple of problems for me, because I've told on the podcast a couple of times about my first discovery of stand-up paddleboarding, which was in horrendous conditions with a huge headwind, and it was horizontal rain. And I went out and did a very hard paddle up wind and fell in loads, and by any rights that should have turned me off the sport. But just the enjoyment of being out there in nature and with the water, apparently that's something that we're all hardwired for, so it shouldn't have been a surprise after all.
I'm going to go out tomorrow morning. I'm all pumped. Great. Well, Simon, thanks so much for doing all that research on these 8 books. And guys out there, I think if you read some of these books, change your whole perception of paddleboarding and just get you more into it and more focused on it. So check out our show notes. As I said, www.supfm.show/book club, and we'll list all those books there, and you can just go click them and get them from Amazon. Just thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. We're trying to build an email list so we can actually understand who you are, because we know there's thousands and thousands of you listening to our podcast, and we're really stoked about that. So first of all, we want to say thank you for that. We really do appreciate you listening. And secondly, come and join us. We're creating a community via email. We're starting it off with email, and we'd really love to continue that with virtual paddles, and hopefully even physical meetups. So we'd love to try and build a community together and do some really fun things, because we can do lots of things when we're together.
Absolutely, and we've got some great collaborations coming up as well. And we're covering a number of subjects which I know particularly new paddleboarders would be very, very keen on. So keep listening out, join our email list. And as we mentioned, if you do want our free guide to apps, then come onto the website, sign up, and we'll send you that for free.
That's at supfm.show. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to SUPfm, the #1 podcast for stand-up paddlers wherever you are. If you like what you've heard, please leave us a review on iTunes. Until then, we'll see you on the water.